Chapter 8:28. Bardi's battle seemed to have reached its end as the Chaos main gods collapsed one by one. However, the core of the battle was still the god who was enveloped in endless holy light. However, he now appeared rather unsightly. The holy light that was so blinding that people couldn't even look at it had dimmed. When he used divine power to counteract the Chaos main god's self-destructions, he naturally used up even more power. Time and time again, main god-level clones perished, taking with them the power of faith and divine power that had been accumulated over thousands of years. Finally, the face hidden in the light appeared before the mortals. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, a rather handsome face, and a cold, expressionless face. Perhaps he would be quite popular among women, but at this time, this was a sign of weakness. Finally, the god of holy light is no longer undefeatable. There was an old saying that the enemy of an enemy was a friend. It was quite easy for friendship to come when there was a common enemy. But, if the common enemy disappeared, friendship would easily capsize. The nature gods and other neutral gods all wanted to become even stronger and become the ruler of this vast mortal plane. Not to mention the Chaos main gods who were eager to take action. Many ancient existences among them had been paying attention to this battle all this time. The will of the Chaos Abyss would be unable to order a main god around. Carwin's relationship with a main god was more like a mercenary relationship. Apart from the unfortunate Donati's, Sophocles, and the inexperienced Carwins wouldn't be able to order any of the Chaos Abyss main gods whose names had long since been forgotten by ordinary people. Most of these ancients were defeated in the past holy wars. Some were once great heroes, and some were survivors of the ruling god systems. Perhaps some among them were living a peaceful life of retirement, and some were tired of the holy wars. However, there were definitely some who still had ambitions for the mortal plane, and were restlessly hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. In the previous holy wars, these ancient existences hadn't taken action because of the existence of the will of the Chaos Abyss. This was because they wouldn't be able to become the final victors without their own kin. But now, the will of the Chaos Abyss was no longer present, so all restrictions were meaningless. It seemed that it was time for them to return to the mortal plane. However, the god of holy light was far too much of an eyesore. The god of holy light was the strongest main god. He was an existence that was impossible to defeat. No main god would be able to fight against him. His pure divine power server had finally reached the limits of the multiverse. The undefeatable god of holy light was more than enough to threaten any powerful existence with ambitions for the mortal plane. The Chaos faction's overall power level was several times stronger than the Order faction. This was a fact that everyone knew. If a sufficient number of Chaos main gods joined forces to invade the Order faction, even the god of holy light would definitely be defeated. Of course, the invading main gods would probably die at the god of holy light's hands. Nobody was willing to become cannon fodder. The end result was that nobody started invading the undead plane. This was all because of the existence of the god of holy light. Even I had to admit this. I had tried to weaken the god of holy light in order to create an opportunity for hell. However, I had always controlled the degree of weakening the god of holy light. I had stepped on the brakes at several important decisions. I knew that it was absolutely necessary for the god of holy light to exist in the mortal plane before the Hell faction and Nature faction truly took over the holy light faction's territory. But now, everything had changed as Cavendish's final plan took effect. Perhaps the god of holy light hadn't been weakened by much. Perhaps he was still the strongest main god in the world. However, he had now revealed his weakness in front of everyone. He was no longer undefeatable. The wolves that had feared him would now view him as weak prey. They wouldn't give him any time to rest or recover. Meanwhile, behind the god of holy light, his allies from earlier were also having their own thoughts. Perhaps now that the external enemy had been eliminated, it was time to settle old scores. In a way, the Chaos faction was much more proactive than the Order faction. Perhaps it would be difficult for them to form a stable alliance, but they would unhesitatingly use all their chips when an opportunity presented itself. 125. I don't usually see them, but they've all appeared now. Renee was counting the number of Chaos main gods that were currently on the battlefield or about to enter the battlefield. This wasn't the end of the battle. Chaos domains opened up one after another. The Chaos dimensional door that had originally been closed was forcefully opened from the other side. The Chaos main gods all turned their gazes here. This time, their target wasn't Carwin's. Instead, it was the large ball of light that was showing signs of weakening. The scariest enemy would always be the unknown. Now that the god of holy light finally lost his barrier of the unknown and revealed his trump card, he instantly went from being the hunter to the hunted. This had been Renee's choice from the very start. In the captain's room of the Borealis airship, the flagship of the Mist Kingdom's Big Dipper fleet, Renee had just woken up from a deep sleep when she encountered the legendary Borealis airship. "My dear younger brother, where do you intend to go?" Cavendish didn't respond. Instead, he chuckled out loud as he looked at Rain's icy and angry face. "Haha, Roland, I never expected that you would have such a hobby of cross-dressing and acting as a child." There was an explosion as the little Loli's thick and black tube shot out a fatal object. Cavendish could only swallow the rest of his mocking words. Gleena Mist was Roland Mist's proudest and most outstanding disciple. Roland had once used his own bloodline to replace Gleena Mist's bloodline. It could be said that Gleena Mist's bloodline was an inferior version of the Arbiter bloodline. Her power level had reached semi-god several years ago. She scored full points in all sorts of subjects. Her combat techniques and experience were excellent as well. Her knowledge in all sorts of engineering was an excellent support. She was at the top of the world in everything from her combat puppets to her explosive. Renee Mist had a Chaos bloodline. She was a Chaos Knight who mainly fought by summoning demons. Plus, she had a lazy attitude towards cultivation. It was a compliment to say that her power level was a mystery. Her actual power level was mediocre. If Roland, who had a god's descent, and Cavendish, who had an ancestral bloodline, were about the same in power level, then in a one-on-one fight, Gleena would be able to take care of 10 Renees. And when the pilot's techniques were about the same, the performance of the pilot's body would become the key to victory. Perhaps Renee was far more of an outstanding warrior than Gleena. However, the young Gleena had fought so hard all along. She had long since stood at the top of the world. The worst part was that Renee was a user of the power of the Chaos Abyss. She was someone who borrowed power. And when the person she borrowed power from, my ancestor Cavendish, died, it would be quite difficult to say how much power she had left. At the very least, if a true god died, that true god's priest would be completely useless. On the other hand, Renee was definitely resisting Cavendish's will. Meanwhile, Gleena was cooperating with Roland. With 1 plus and 1 minus, the difference between the two sides became even greater. You have no chance of winning. Voluntarily leave Renee's body, and I'll only seal you for 500 years. Otherwise, this wasn't an empty threat. There was an obvious difference in power between their bodies. The feeling of weakness within his body made Cavendish realize that it was impossible for him to win. At the same time, he was also regretting that he shouldn't have urged his descendant to properly cultivate instead of resting. Renee was relying too much on the power of the Chaos Abyss. Is this the end? Cavendish was rather hesitant. He felt that it was a pity, but more than anything, he was displeased that the game had ended so early. Saying that there would be a third door was obviously just a lie to sway Roland. At this point, it seemed that everything could only end here. Perhaps admitting defeat would at least look better on the surface. If the result was already decided, it would be rather unseemly to be beaten to death before being sealed. Asterisk crack. Asterisk at this moment the entire world trembled slightly. It was as if something had silently changed. It was as if a certain door had been opened by a key. The two siblings exchanged glances in a small room. Both of them paused in surprise. This scene had completely exceeded their expectations. Just what had happened? The door opened? The door opened. After a while, Roland and Cavendish both realized what had happened. I should have hardened my heart and killed her, even if she was Harlowey's father. Did I? Ha, don't say that after the fact. You wouldn't have been able to do it. Without a neutral jury, you wouldn't have been able to activate that law sword at all. How could you possibly have won against me without that? Indeed, this was the only possible explanation. At this moment, in the Chaos Abyss, the former Elven Emperor Didina, the former Chaos Girl, opened that door as the only survivor here. Chapter 829. Let's rewind time slightly. About an hour before the dimensional door was opened, the battle between the two brothers in the Chaos Abyss came to an end. Death sentence. When the judge smashed down his gavel for the final time, everything was reduced to dust, just like an afterimage that was shattered. The two brothers fell at the same time, and the Roland clones also turned into bubbles at the same time. The endless snow swiftly melted, and the pitch-black palace returned to the world. The snow took away all the corpses and ruins, leaving behind only an empty hall. Wretch, the only survivor in this hall, was currently lying on the ground and vomiting. This wasn't some evil curse, nor was he a novice who couldn't stand the sight of blood. It was simply that he suddenly relaxed after experiencing intense fear. His body's natural instincts of being able to survive were rather unbearable. When a snake stared at a frog, its instinctive fear would make it impossible for the frog to move. The cruelest death sentence would be to tell the frog when it would die, causing the frog to slowly die in fear and anxiety. The difference between Cavendish, Roland, and Didina was no longer the difference between a snake and a frog. This was the difference between a T-Rex and an ant. Just the wind and tremors caused by Didina's movement would be enough to destroy an ant colony. The survivors were tied up in the audience seats and forcibly enjoyed this monster battle at the closest possible distance for more than an hour. Even though the slightest shockwave would shatter their bodies, they didn't die because they were jurors. Even though they should have been completely dead, they managed to survive without any injuries due to the court's requirements. Perhaps killing intent was only a legend in novels. However, high-level demons were indeed capable of killing mortals and low-level magical creatures with their auras and angry glares. The battle between the two main gods finally escalated into a chaotic battle between over 1,000 main gods and powerful god. Didina had been willing to die many times over. However, the result of this dance with the death god was that the succubus mind and physical body simultaneously surpassed their limit. A slightly weaker soul would have long since died. However, Didina still felt terrible. His stomach convulsed and food spurted out. His mucus and saliva flew everywhere. Even if his rationality repeatedly told him that the threat was over, he couldn't control his body at all. He could only use this method to vent his instinctive fear. That extremely embarrassing look didn't change just because he was a beauty. Didina's stomach was completely empty with only water inside. Only then did she barely manage to recover a little. She lay paralyzed on the ground and took deep breaths, as if this was the only way to feel alive. Her sweat made her wet as if she had just been fished out of the water. But even though her legs were still trembling, she still forced herself to move. Even though her legs were still weak, she could still reluctantly accept having to stand on all fours. There's still time. Not far away was the altar of the twin goddesses that had already been reduced to ruins. Although the snow had left and the altar that was buried under the snowfield was once again exposed, there were countless damaged areas. It was obvious that it could no longer be used. Chaos summoning. However, it was likely that most people had forgotten that the seemingly weak Didina was actually the ruler of an entire level of the Chaos Abyss. Although Dedina's power was more dependent on her pets rather than herself, she was a demon lord who had both the Elven Empire and the demons. She was definitely a top-level mage. Numerous low-level and mid-level demons rushed out of the teleportation portal. However, they weren't given orders to kill. Dedina was incredibly fatigued, so she ordered them to work as laborers and repair the altar under her command. Summoning other demons was the most common racial talent that low-level demons possessed. However, demons didn't like to use this ability. That was because summoning existences of the same or higher level would have far too great of a price. They would have to respond to the summoning, and it would be quite easy for them to become mortal enemies. As for summoning weaker demons, what meaning would there be? However, succubi were an exception. Due to certain well-known reasons, succubi were quite popular among the Chaos Abyss lords. Many famous succubi had multiple demon lords as lovers. That was why, even though succubi had the weakest combat strength among demons, nobody dared to force them. Demon Lord Dedina furiously opened a portal to the Chaos Abyss to summon her subordinates and high-level demons. The high-level demons then followed their master's orders to summon high-level and mid-level demons as well. The summoned demons speedily formed a new labor army. The low-level demons unhesitatingly followed their new master's orders when they saw the demon lord. However, the high-level demons had many schemes when they saw the exhausted demon lord, who was also a succubus who wasn't skilled at combat. But before they could do anything, the experienced Dedina directly found an excuse to execute two high-level demons who had been slacking off. She successfully made an example out of them and forcefully suppressed the possibility of a rebellion. Perhaps nobody would have expected that the person who designed this altar and the theory behind how to open the door was actually the seemingly inconspicuous Dedina. Perhaps nobody would have expected that this nameless, weak succubus was actually the most outstanding spatial magic master in the world. Only Dedina, who had obtained the Elven Empire's inheritance and knowledge of the Chaos Abyss, would be able to complete this miraculous project. It's finally going to be completed. Even though the repair work was progressing quite quickly, Dedina's anxiety didn't decrease at all. She still couldn't explain Roland's sudden appearance. Dedina still didn't feel safe at all. "Get out of my way." Dedina whipped away the clumsy temporary laborer. She couldn't wait any longer and directly took action herself, personally acting as the laborer. "Finally, I can end everything. This damned holy war and cycle of reincarnation." Dedina was finally unable to calm down as she looked at the twin altar before her. Hadn't she waited for tens of thousands of years for this moment? Nobody knew that Dedina had been tightly holding onto a golden pendant that contained an old, dim yellow portrait. This was an item that she had retrieved from the ruins of the Elven Empire. This was a smiling golden-haired elf girl who was weaving a flower garland for her parents. Her innocent appearance was truly cute. However, if Dedina herself saw this, she would probably unhesitatingly destroy this dark history. "My pitiful Harloise, even to this day, I still don't dare to tell you who I am. Finally, today, everything will end. Our long-cherished wish is right before us." For some reason, this expressionless succubus demon lord seemed just like a middle-aged man who was worried about personal gains and losses. Perhaps nobody expected that Dedina, who Roland viewed as nothing more than an accomplice, was actually the root of everything. The natural laws of chaos and order? Fate and the gods' will? The inevitable replacement of the ruling species? From now on, there will be no natural laws. All life in He shall obtain true freedom. Chapter 830. The Light of Sinsar Dub, a wise schemer, the legendary elven Emperor Abolar the Seventh, and now, the succubus Dedina. Unlike human dynasties, where the last emperors had abnormally short lifespans, the last emperors of long-lived species had more than enough time for humans to reproduce for several generations. This was more than enough time to judge an emperor's accomplishments and talent. Emperors weren't the rulers of a destroyed country, but they had the fate of a destroyed country. This was always given to the last emperors who tried to change the world. Abolur was probably one of the most unfortunate ones. When he took over, the Elven Empire was already in a terrible mess. Outside, the great demon empire was still powerful, but the humans were quietly rising up. The elves' status as the ruling species was being challenged. Inside, the silver elves and moon elves rose up, challenging the gold elves' authority. The most unacceptable part was that the 4 superior elves were all working with other species. The Elven Empire's most precious treasure, magic, was being left behind in the world. The great demons had their own shaman and witchcraft systems, which didn't affect them much. The weak and short-lived humans had a chance to rise up. Abolur displayed his talents despite the internal and external problems. He supported the wild elves and mixed-blood elf elites to enter the Elven Empire's upper-class society, suppressing the increasingly powerful moon elves, and creating a new balance. However, the Red Tribe opposed the Red Tribe's unyielding attitude towards the outside world, making it appear rather weak. The Red Tribe had always exercised restraint in the numerous border conflict. Not only did the Red Tribe retreat towards the overbearing beastmen and great demons, the Red Tribe even made concessions towards the fragile human tribes. Abolur's style of ruling was like a coward who only knew how to fight amongst himself. Of course, he wouldn't be praised. However, it was likely that nobody could imagine what Abolur had been thinking back then. The elves have been the ruling species for far too long, to the point where even the cycle of reincarnation has stopped. Politicians only cared about the present, because they wouldn't be able to survive without vote. However, politicians could see far into the future, far beyond the common people's understanding. In that generation, the Gold Elves were one of the few golden bloodlines that had survived from the immemorial era. The Gold Elves had witnessed the birth and origin of magic. Many of the Elven Elders had witnessed the immemorial God Wars. The Elven Empire had been powerful for far too long, to the point where new species couldn't possibly rise. The Elves were the strongest main gods in the world. Nearly half of the Order main gods were from the Elf God faction. The Emperor of the Elf Empire was also the most powerful and influential existence in the world. At Abolur's level, he was no longer just considering his own species. Of course, he knew about the unspoken rules of the Holy War. The elves weren't able to inherit the throne of the giants from the previous ruling species, not only because of luck. The Chaos Abyss would no longer allow the elves to continue blocking the path of evolution. As for the Order faction, let's not talk about the grudges accumulated between the Order faction, the Nature faction, and the ancient giant gods. The fact that the Order faction's population had an ever-decreasing fertility rate, to the point where it was even lower than the powerful angel species, was the best evidence of this world's attitude towards the Order faction. As for the Gold Elves, they only had a single newborn every few centuries. Even the dragons didn't have such a tragic experience. A race without newborns has no future. The higher we climb, the harder we fall. If we make a mistake in the next holy war, will our mortal enemies still give us a chance? The only thing the elves will face is the complete annihilation of the entire species. Abolur was the leader and helmsman of the elves. Abolur clearly knew that there were countless hidden rocks in the river in front of him, but he was still unable to stop this gigantic airship. Forcefully stopping the airship would also result in the destruction of everyone on board. That was why Abolur chose to fail. Perhaps the only way for the elves to continue existing was to accept their fated failure. Voluntarily stepping off the stage would be better than being kicked off the stage by others. The Gold Elves began to retreat from the upper echelons of the Elf Empire. The ancient gods began to enter a deep slumber. The Empire's borders began to shrink, and the humans and great demons began to take over those lands and resources. Abolur had almost succeeded. However, there were no ifs or misses in history. A ruler who constantly led his citizens to victory and a better life shouldn't be criticized. But to the elves, The foolish Abolur was only good at suppressing his citizens and manipulating the balance of power. He was nothing more than a coward who was afraid of even fighting with low-level creatures, humans. Evaluating a politician shouldn't be based on how he acted at the time. Instead, one should look at how he would develop after he left office. Seeds that would take years, decades, or even centuries to germinate would eventually bloom and bear fruit. Although the citizens had already forgotten about the person who had planted the seeds, future generations of historians would still be able to remember a few things. From a certain standpoint, Abolur had indeed succeeded. However, the betrayal of the superior elves caused the Gold Elves to become truly weak. The Gold Elves and gods' revenge against each other, as well as the superior elves' struggle for power, caused the Gold Elven Empire to gradually return to being a scattered tribal society. The Gold Elves were forced to voluntarily retreat from the stage of history, but it was likely that this wasn't how Abolur had originally expected. Nobody would be able to resist the corruption of the River Styx, even if Abolur had once been a supreme existence. Only the newborn demon Didina had managed to reach the surface of the River Styx. But perhaps because her hatred and stubbornness were too deep, or perhaps because she had died too pitifully, the newborn demon Didina regained her memories from her previous life less than half a month after reaching the surface. As the Gold Elven Emperor, Abolur's knowledge, and experience caused the newborn demon Didina to be incredibly anxious and frustrated. Half a month's worth of memories was destroyed by tens of thousands of years of memories. The newborn Didina had many personalities that belonged to Abolur. Just like Eliza and Lisa's relationship, Abolur's resistance against the River Styx allowed the newborn demon Didina to retain her old habits of thinking. But even though Abolur was incredibly anxious and intelligent, the newborn Didina was still just an ordinary inferior demon. A militia that had been trained for 3 years would be able to deal with her with a shovel. Abolur would have to follow the rules of the Chaos Abyss and start over from scratch. There was no such thing as luck in the bloodshed of the Chaos Abyss. It would be several hundred years before Abolur truly had the power and opportunity to leave the Chaos Abyss. By the time he returned to the Gold Elf Empire, the palace had already been reduced to rubble. Abolur could only return to the Chaos Abyss with his personal belongings. Nobody knew better than him about the elves' research on divination and prophecy abilities. In order to escape from the newly born elven gods and the superior elves' pursuit. That's right, Abolur had chosen the path of a succubus, choosing to use another form of life form to complete his mission. Abolur was unable to meet with Heloise, even though he knew that his pure and innocent daughter had now become the Banshee Queen. Back then, the Gold Elf gods were all traitors. The Gold Elf gods were barely able to tolerate the existence of a harmless and weak succubus. That was because she hadn't even reached adulthood yet, and she was already dead. Showing some generosity was also a type of behavior. However, the Gold Elf gods were unable to accept a returning emperor. Abolur didn't dare to become too powerful, because too many gazes on him would only reveal his true identity. Then, the traitors would do everything in their power to kill him. In the end, Abolur became Abolur, a harmless succubus lord. Abolur also attempted to take revenge, but before her plan could be carried out, the target of her revenge died first. Far too many things had happened over the long years. The superior elves and their gods all met with misfortune. The Gold Elf Empire transformed into numerous elven tribes. Abolur's enemies all died. In fact, Abolur didn't even know who he should hate. Hate the traitors from back then? Hate the Gold Elf Empire's fated destruction? Abolur was wise and calm, but also pitiful. In the end, he turned his gaze to the cycle of reincarnation that had caused all of this. Even if we voluntarily give up, the cycle of reincarnation still won't let us go? Could it be that we're destined to have nowhere to run to? Who made it so that all of this would happen? The cycle of reincarnation will never end, and misfortune will never end? Perhaps nobody had expected that the person who had suggested this plan to Sophocles, to the god of evolution, to Cavendish, was this seemingly ordinary succubus. Even without her subordinates, Abolur still possessed wisdom and knowledge. This seemingly harmless diplomat was far more dangerous than a million-strong army. Did Abolur want revenge? Did he want all life in the world to die together with the Gold Elf Empire? Did he want to save the world? Did he want to end the cycle of reincarnation? Perhaps even Abolur himself wouldn't be able to answer these questions. Anyways, I don't have anything left to treasure anymore, so let's gamble. Abolur had used Cavendish, and Cavendish had also used Abolur. Finally, the dimensional door was opened. When the sealed door of the crystal wall was opened, this world finally welcomed its destiny. Crack. The entire world didn't change at all. However, anyone with even the slightest bit of power would be able to sense that the dimensional door had been opened to this world. Countless outsiders could still see this world. Chapter 831. From the very beginning, the gate to the crystal wall had surpassed the understanding of mortals. It was not a door that actually existed, but an existence akin to rules and concept. Even if it was just one step away from stepping out, the natives of this world would never be able to take that step. No, it would be more accurate to say that they simply could not see the way out. This was just like how fish couldn't leave the water and humans had to live on the ground. There was no need for an explanation at all. This was the rule, this was common sense. There were always exceptions to everything. There were always those special existences who found a loophole in the rules and successfully left this plane. But it never came back, after all. Compared to preventing people from going out, this invisible door was originally used to stop visitors from the outside world. Outsiders who did not receive an invitation from the master could not enter this world. It was still possible to go out, but not a single one of them came back. The fact that there was no return once again shook the resolve of the fugitives. But was it true that no one had ever entered from the outside world? Not necessarily. Damn it! Nothing had changed in the outside world, but the situation on the battlefield had changed in an instant. The chaotic space began to disperse, as if something was beginning to dissipate. Above the pitch-black sky, there seemed to be countless pairs of eyes watching this place. The Chaos Abyss main gods that had just been attempting to surround and kill the god of holy light unhesitatingly turned around and vanished. Even if they were only escaping back to the Chaos Abyss to hide, it was still better than facing the unknown and becoming cannon fodder. The incredibly fatigued god of holy light sensed the faint presence of his will, which was why he stood up again. His mechanical and emotionless gaze swept over the battlefield filled with broken bodies and corpses. The holy light gods were all trying to avoid the divine king's gaze, and the angels had all been wiped out. Finally, he retracted his gaze and fixed it on the sky. There, countless pupils were looking down. There, countless malice and wills had already solidified. The holy light flashed again, and the god of light flew up again. This time, he was still alone. This time, he did not look back. Purify, perhaps it was his mechanical thinking that determined his actions, or perhaps it was simply because this was the most optimal choice for the divine power server, or perhaps it was destined from the start, or perhaps he still had a bit of humanity left in him. Protect, the god of light turned into a pillar of light and faced the unknown. Scattered silver feathers fluttered down and covered the land. The god of holy light's sigh surprised me as well. Perhaps the world still underestimated him. But the next moment I knew I couldn't just do nothing. Even if we were fighting each other to stop the door from opening, now the door has been opened, and we have lost the reason to fight. Even though the holy war between order and chaos was at its climax, even though both sides hated each other to the point of wanting to perish together, but now the door was opened. Both sides were facing the possibility of external enemies. The two major factions no longer had any reason to kill each other. "Is this what you want?" I didn't receive an answer to my question. At this moment, Cavendish sank into a rare moment of deep thought. Could it be that he finally realized that he had made a huge mistake and was regretting it? Damn it, yes. This body is too weak. How can I go out and have fun? Carwin smiled. His smile was filled with malice, as if he wanted to see my reaction. But me? Instead, he felt like laughing. Was there anything I didn't understand about this fellow? It was impossible to hope that he would regret and reflect on himself from the very start. However, he was definitely regretting it now, and the reason was right in front of him. Hey, can't you be a little gentler? This is your precious granddaughter's body, isn't it? I unhesitatingly punched Cavendish's lower abdomen. The tremendous pain caused his expression to distort. Before he could even react, I broke his ankle and knocked him unconscious with a single punch. Let's just treat this pain as interest from my early harvest. After taking care of him, it was my turn to have a headache. While Cavendish was trapped in this physical body, I was also trapped in this physical body. Our physical bodies? They were already dead. Not only were they dead, if my inference was correct, both my and Cavendish's main god-level physical bodies had become sacrifices necessary to open the door to the holy light. Not only that, sacrifices that were delivered to our doorstep. There's not much time left. We need to hurry. I unhesitatingly walked out while carrying Cavendish. I didn't have much time left, and there were still many things I needed to do. The god of holy light, who had been preventing the door from opening, was now the first to face the unknown. This made me feel rather complex emotions. But no matter what, we now had a pathfinder. No matter what the god of holy light would encounter, we would at least have more time to prepare. Let's think on the bright side. Perhaps the god of holy light will be even more weakened outside. The god of holy light will be able to defeat everything. This was probably the first time that I had ever hoped for the god of holy light to win. But the next moment, I couldn't smile anymore. Boom. A soundless explosion spread through the world. At that moment, all the god of holy light's statues shattered, and all the devout believers started crying. On the battlefield, large numbers of angels chose to commit suicide in despair. The death of a god caused everything to descend into chaos. The god of holy light has died? Wonderful. It seems that there are many. I unhesitatingly stabbed Cavendish in the head. The only reason why I didn't seal him away or directly send him into the river Styx was because Cynthia's knowledge would likely become very important at a time like this. I looked up at the sky. Even though I knew that the sky wasn't the way out, I could sense countless malicious intents gathering. The only reason why they hadn't chosen to enter was that they were gathering and testing the waters. Meanwhile, in the chaos abyss, Didina, who had just been praying, was now half kneeling on the ground with a pained expression. Her gaze pierced through the pitch-black darkness. She could also sense the god of holy light's death, as well as the endless malicious intents. Did I lose the gamble? Chapter 832. Even though there was clearly nothing in the sky, it would always steal everyone's attention, intentionally or otherwise. Is this the calm before the storm? It was now the 17th day since the dimensional barrier had been opened. The anticipated storm still hadn't arrived. The entire mortal plane was abnormally calm. The unending war that had been going on for more than 10 years had finally stopped. All sorts of information and guesses were spread all over the mortal plane. The ancient gods had reappeared in the mortal plane, and there was a tremendous amount of news every day. However, there was no actual information. The fairies furiously moved about the entire world in search of information about possible enemies. In the mage country, the most ancient books had been dug up. However, it was likely that the book's history wasn't enough to record the secrets of the ancient gods' wars ever since they were written in modern languages. The god of holy light's sudden death not only shocked the mortal plane, but also caused panic. In the world where the strongest and undying existences lived, the god of holy light represented the strongest main god. He was an undefeatable existence. Even though he had been weakened by war and the chaos main god, the fact that such an existence had instantly died in the outside world was something that ordinary people couldn't understand. However, for ordinary people, the Holy Light Church's collapse and the death of the supreme god of holy light was a destructive reality. Panic, anxiety, and despair. Even though the fact that the dimensional barrier had been opened hadn't spread among ordinary people yet, just the fact that holy light had been extinguished was more than enough to cause a tidal wave of despair. As a true god died, a large number of true god priests lost their ability to cast spells and their source of power. Divine job class members who borrowed divine power experienced the special feeling of losing their connection to divine power. Some priests went insane, while others chose to commit suicide. Most fell into despair and despair. This was not Earth, where religion was mysterious. In this world where there was a true God, the Church was the representative of the God on earth. The God was also the supporter and the object of worship of the Church. When the true God fell, His Church would naturally lose its meaning of existence. The Holy Church, which had priests and bishops as its core, was collapsing at an inconceivable speed. Pope Coloma, one of the Holy Church's higher-ups, directly committed suicide. More than 70% of the bishops lost their ability to move. The collapse of faith affected all of human society. If this chaos continued, it was easy to foresee that human society would collapse before any invaders from the outside world arrived. Fortunately, in this world, there was more than one God whose divine domain was holy light. At the critical moment when the holy light was about to be destroyed, the southern sect and the Hades stood up and decided to become idols. I meant that they decided to use the Hades pillar of holy light to become the new main god of holy light. This is only a replacement for the god of holy light. It's just a temporary chaos. The old god of holy light is tired, so he chose the strongest holy knight, Estrada, as his successor. Who would believe such nonsense? No matter if you believe it or not, at least I believe it. Actually, as long as a lie has value, as long as there are enough benefits, there will naturally be people who will cover their ears and pretend to be deceived. Rather than completely overthrowing a regime, it would be better to change a new leader, which would definitely cause far less panic. As for whether or not we would need to settle old debts, that would be a matter for the future. The core of human society, the Holy Church, had split up. Some chose to ally with us and become members of the new Southern sect. To them, perhaps it was just a new statue with a new face and a new name when praying. Their belief in the God of Holy Light would still allow them to use the God of Holy Light as a divine power server and obtain power. The teachings of pure Holy Light were much easier to follow than the original teachings. As for the other half, no matter if it was because they were unwilling to accept reality or because they had a grudge against the Hades, they chose to self-exile. However, there was no meaning in doing so. After all, they had lost their power. The God they believed in had perished. As believers who refused to accept reality and prayed to an existence of nothingness, they were essentially no different from believers of evil gods. Meanwhile, the Holy Light faction gods had no intentions of accepting a new main god. They returned to the upper planes and didn't bother with the changes happening in the mortal plane. It seemed that they were prepared to wait for future developments before making a decision. Most god factions had made the same decision. The Chaos main gods returned to the depths of the Chaos abyss, while the Nature faction hid in their own subplanes and peacefully became cowards. The Hades faction began taking over the Holy Church's inheritance. Taking over the Holy Church's worldly wealth was the equivalent of taking over the Holy Church's countless roots in human society. The God of Holy Light was only 1/4 of the four-pillar gods Hades faction. The God of Holy Light was also beginning to spread, and it was possible that the God of Holy Light would be able to replace the Holy Light faction. Perhaps, given several hundred years and several generations, the Hades faction's path of law and order would become the new mainstream of society. However, in the eyes of many, the Hades faction's current actions were foolish, short-sighted, and suicidal. They're not only taking over wealth and power, they're also taking over the responsibility of fighting against the outsiders. Now that they have control over the situation, they have no path of retreat. They've become the first living target. But if I had to say, those cowards who hid in their nests and waited for others to become cannon fodder, passively waiting for the situation to develop, were the truly foolish ones. Hide? Where can they hide and wait for others to become cannon fodder? This time, there's really nowhere to hide. Nobody knew better than me just how frightening the outsiders from the outside world were. After all, the goddess of order had recently been constantly feeding me information about how powerful the outsiders were, even if that information was definitely outdated by several dozen or even several million years. The Void Distorter is a gigantic ball of distorted light. He can devour anything, including gods and titans. But his true body isn't even in this world. The crystal-heavy fish isn't a fish at all. He's an incredibly frightening soul devourer. Any life form that gets close to him will have their soul absorbed. And the crystal-heavy fish has innumerable supernatural abilities. I read out all this information to the fairies and then sent them to every corner of the world. But, in order to avoid unnecessary panic, I also told them that I would only send this information to the local authorities and organizers if the monsters mentioned in the information truly appeared. This was necessary. Not only were the fairies frightened by this information, even I could somewhat understand what the goddesses of order and chaos had done back in the day after reading this information. Let's do our best and leave it to fate. Although there's a 99% chance that it'll be meaningless, it'll still be better to have an extra chance of victory if we really meet. Soon, I learned that this wasn't an unnecessary action. Those ancient existences still existed in the outside world, and this time, they were still the vanguard. A meteor shower has appeared in the Queso Mountains. There are traces of the Void Distorter appearing. Chapter 833. Calamities would always descend from the heavens, and bad news would always follow. Justice would always be shot down from the heavens before it could even descend. Cough, cough, I mean, whenever you heard bad news, even more bad news would always be on the way. After the first eyewitness report arrived, more and more news about invaders from other dimensions arrived. Most of these invaders weren't on my list of information, but the few that were confirmed were still inconceivably powerful. It seemed that war was about to descend upon this land filled with calamities once again. Every day I would hear about a new war. Although the gods would actively participate, and the final victors of these small-scale battles would always be the defending side, everyone knew that something was wrong with the situation. In the eyes of those who were observant, these invaders were nothing more than the first signs. That was because, according to the rules of war, only the cannon fodder and scouts would enter unfamiliar enemy territory first. Even if these cannon fodder were so powerful that the gods would have to deal with them, the result of the Queso Mountains being attacked by a large number of Void Distorters was that only two powerful gods would attack and raise the entire mountain range to the ground. Not everyone would be mysteriously confident that they would always be victorious. Only a battle maniac would blindly attack when there was insufficient information and gamble on the fate of their country. In normal situations, armies and powerful individuals who would be able to make the final decision would only consider entering the battlefield when there was sufficient information. Meanwhile, we could sense that more and more people were observing us from the outside world, and they were becoming more and more powerful. Even if they still didn't choose to enter the dimensional barrier, fear and despair were spreading more and more. Renee was currently recovering from a sudden illness in her harem. Gleena was the only senator left in the Mist Alliance. All I could do was do my best to ensure that the Mist Alliance survived this calamity. The invaders appeared quite casually. It seemed as if they were invading and attacking, but more often than not, they were probing. I personally fought several times. Perhaps it was because even the invaders from other dimensions felt that the Northlands was far too barren, so the invaders weren't particularly strong. The Aurora Knight Squadron and Big Dipper Squadron easily wiped out the invaders. However, everyone knew that this was only a sign that a storm was brewing. How's the plan going? Not so good. Most of the people who won the lottery don't want to leave. They believe that things haven't reached this stage yet. Let's have the volunteers board the Ark first. On the other side, the final Doomsday Ark plan was also forcefully activated. The portal leading to the Land of Spring, the main plane of the Hades, had a daily flow of hundreds of thousands of people, but it was still not enough. If the situation of the war in the future was bad, as long as all the portals were cut off, the Land of Spring and the Hades that were bound to it would have nothing to do with He. A new crystal wall would isolate all spies. Humans, beastmen, and elves all loved being on ship. He's seed could also sprout on new soil, preserving the last spark of civilization and species. But until the very last step, nobody wanted to leave their own world. It wasn't that I didn't have much confidence in the future battles. It was just that I was used to calculating for failure before calculating for victory. At the very least, I had to leave a path of retreat for myself. Ale and the others also agreed with my judgment. Judging from the most recent information, the gods of the Hades, Holy Light, and Nature factions had all appeared. On the other hand, it seemed that the elemental tide had become even more active now that the dimensional door had been opened. Our lives had become much better. But from another perspective, perhaps this was also a necessary condition for the invaders to enter this world, just like how the main gods and powerful gods had been restricted from entering the mortal plane in the past. How much longer do we have to wait? Soon. The silly cat couldn't take it anymore, so she jumped onto the windowsill and closed her eyes to rest. Amelia took over the rest of the shift. It was worth mentioning that Harlois actually managed to survive after being taught a good lesson by Eliza. And now that the dimensional door had been opened, Eliza no longer needed to stop me, so she returned to my side. Of course, I welcomed the return of such a powerful combat strength. After all, Eliza was still as unfathomably powerful as ever. However, Harlois and Amelia didn't seem to trust her. They insisted that I needed someone to protect me, so they started taking two shifts. Right now, I was sitting on Glena's small stool and dealing with government affairs. Amelia was in the living room drinking tea and reading a book. She also kept an eye on the strongest existence in the world, who was wearing maid attire and seriously cleaning the windows. Since there wasn't much time left, I decided to let her do as she pleased. Nobody would be able to defeat her, and since she liked cleaning, I would let her do it. She had a dark expression on her face, which indicated that she hadn't been in a good mood recently. This was because she would occasionally explode her ki and release her aura to gather mana. She would do something that would attract attention, but wouldn't cause any actual damage. She would occasionally cause some trouble. Harlois and Amelia were the ones who were tired and needed to change shift. I knew that Eliza was looking for an opportunity to vent her anger, while Harlois and Amelia were mysteriously in the wrong. The end result was that we tacitly agreed to let Eliza do whatever she wanted. The atmosphere in my small courtyard was becoming increasingly tense. Semi-gods and main gods were mysteriously fighting against each other, and mortals were the ones suffering when the gods fought. Some people were already fainting for no reason while walking around. I heard that the servants and administrative staff were already starting to shift the responsibility of reporting to me to one another. Eliza, there's a group of uninvited ants in Ice River Town. Go take care of them. At this time, Eliza would be quite convenient. With her help, the Northlands would become the safest place in the world. Her temporary departure also allowed us to heave a sigh of relief. How much longer? Amelia silently closed her book and asked something that came out of nowhere. Waha, what did you say? Oh, Ice River Town is quite far. Even Eliza will need 4 or 5 hours to take care of it. Don't play dumb. You know what I'm asking. I silently sighed. Actually, even I didn't know how to answer this question. A few hours? Tomorrow? A few days? A few months? To be honest, I don't know how much longer I can last, but I'll definitely last longer than that guy. Amelia silently looked at me. She didn't say anything, but her slightly red eyes and calm gaze made me feel like I was unable to endure it. I'm sorry, I had no other choice. I knew that guy would be difficult to deal with, but I didn't expect him to be so difficult. You should know just how dangerous it was back then. I could only go all out. She was such a strong girl. Her silent tears stopped me from explaining anything. I'm sorry, in the end, I could only give a weak explanation. Roland, you're going to die. I was unable to refute the silly cat's words. Yep, I was going to die, or rather, I was already dead. It wasn't that I was interested in staying in Glena's physical body. My physical body and Cavendish's had already perished together. Our souls were probably still soaking in the river Styx. Right now, the only thing that was forcefully staying in the mortal plane was my will. As the river Styx corroded me, it was unknown just how much longer this will of mine would be able to last. Eliza's judgment was correct. My duel with Cavendish would only end in mutual destruction. Her betrayal was only to avoid this possibility. Amelia and Harloise were in the wrong when it came to Eliza. Perhaps this was the final result, which was still unacceptable. This time, when both of our souls fell into the river Styx, the cycle of reincarnation finally caught us as illegal immigrants. There was no longer any reason for me to show mercy. I could sense the river Styx's summoning at all times. I could also sense that my soul was becoming weaker and weaker, but at least for now, Harloise, can't you have some conscience? No matter what, I'm still your master, and I've fed you so much cat food. Meow, of course I remember. I'm your magical pet. If you die, I die. Isn't it just a trial of the Hades and an execution in hell? We agreed long ago that we could just go together. Yep, we can finally have a good rest. We should be happy. Master, thanks to your magical pet contract, even if we reincarnate, we'll still be together. Harloise, your words really moved me. But could you not smile at Amelia while saying that? If you were dissatisfied with your magical pet contract, we could cancel it. Senpai was already smiling dangerously at such an obvious provocation. Amelia seemed to be hesitating. In the end, there were some words that she didn't say out loud. She was the main god of the wood spirits, the true form of the forest of dreams. If she died, the entire wood spirits would die together with her. Amelia was unable to make such a promise. Right, how about I write a will as well? I should first destroy all the books in my old residence. Also, should I give my collection to Adam for safekeeping? Forget it. Marguerite will find them every 2 days and burn them. It'll be so pitiful if news that Roland's belongings were erotic books or something like that. I shook my head as I considered my own future. Although it was likely that other men wouldn't have such a chance in their lifetimes, it would be far too frightening, so I decided to stop here. As I leisurely considered all this nonsense, I was also nearing the end of my work. Actually, there was no way I could finish all the government affairs. It was already quite commendable that I was working so hard. Our current situation was actually quite bad. The entire world was in a bad situation. We're like sheep waiting to be slaughtered. The god of holy light had gone out and then been instantly killed. This proved that going out would be suicidal. If I didn't go out, that would be the equivalent of handing the initiative to the enemy. I knew that I was doing nothing right now. I was only using work to pass the time of anxiousness. I was preparing the Ark while waiting for the final invasion that would eventually arrive. If I don't hurry up, I won't be able to wait. I helplessly looked at my small, tender hands. My previously rosy skin had turned pale and icy. Wearing an undead spirit on a living person's body for too long was causing more and more damage to Gleena. Gleena's physical body's subconscious rejection of me was also becoming more and more obvious. In my current state, with an undead spirit possessing my physical body, I should count as a lich. But before I could sigh about how the world was unpredictable and how the cycle of reincarnation was impossible to predict, the window suddenly opened, and a pale moon in the sky attracted our attention. It was currently late at night, but there were 2 moons in the sky. We didn't even need to think to tell that these were real moons. That was because H's moon definitely wouldn't have a gigantic mouth that was half the size of a planet. Nor would it have an incredibly evil and greedy expression, as if it was looking at the entire world, as if it was looking at delicious cheesecake. And now, it was opening its gigantic mouth and tearing at the moon of H's world. At this moment, the moon god's soundless screams of pain echoed in everyone's ears. However, nobody was able to do anything about it. Star-swallowing demon god, the leader of those bandits. Chapter 834. Patricia's pitiful screams echoed in every living creature's ears. The moon that was being devoured gave everyone the most direct expression of despair. Damn it, the Starlight Network! The moon wasn't the moon god's true body. Rather, it was the concept of her existence. It was just like how the god of holy light would naturally cease to exist if the concept of holy light was erased. As a former order god, Patricia had the same weakness. Along with her existence, the Starlight Network that she had sacrificed most of her divine power to create was torn apart. Any existences from the outside world that invaded the mortal plane would be marked by the omnipresent Starlight King. They would also be watched by the Moon God and the Fate God. This seemingly insignificant design had actually been used multiple times on the battlefield. Dimensional invaders that were marked would become the local residents' prey. They would expose their location and information on the battlefield. No matter how powerful they would still be the prey. This powerful forbidden spell, maintained by the 2 main gods of the Hades, would still be effective even without the Holy Wars system. Recently, no matter how the invaders from other dimensions entered this world, as long as they chose to enter the most fertile main plane, they would be instantly marked by the net of stars, and then countless hunters would be waiting for them. This forbidden spell was split into 2 parts. One was controlled by the former Fate God, and the other was controlled by the moon god Patricia. These 2 gods had been weakened after casting the forbidden spell, so they hid in the Hades. However, the star-devouring demon god seemed to have found a way to break through the forbidden spell. Moon god, no, I definitely can't let her die here. Anxiety was meaningless. She could only see the near future. If the moon was truly devoured by the mortal plane, then Patricia wouldn't just lose her concept of existence. She would also lose the source of her faith. Since the moon was gone, what meaning would there be in being a moon god? And if the 2 main gods of the star net died, the entire star net would instantly collapse. The contract heroes system and defense system built upon it would naturally become useless. Even if it wouldn't instantly return to the chaotic era where everyone was fighting for their lives, it would still require a large amount of time and human resources to make up for it. But what if I stopped the star-devouring demon god? I would have to find a wild, dead star fortress. Patricia, remember this. You've long since ceased to be the moon god. You're the master of starlight of the Hades divine system. The starlight net is the concept that you should have. The moon is only one of the many stars. You haven't lost your existence. You've simply improved your own existence. Since there was no way to stop it, he could only think of a way to protect Patricia first. Perhaps these words were just a game of words, but they provided a way of thinking. From the moment they entered the Hades, the moon god was no longer the moon god. If the moon was viewed as a member of the stars, then the moon god would become a lower concept of the Lord of the Stars. If they only lost a lower concept, Although it would still be a heavy loss, at least they wouldn't die on the spot. If this had been any other god or region, it would have been impossible to change the concept. However, Patricia was the goddess of Hades, and as the creator of Hades and one of the four pillar gods, she had the authority to change divine concept. She had all the necessary seals, documents, and procedures. Changing divine concepts was completely in accordance with the procedures. As long as they acted quickly enough, they should be able to protect Patricia. Patricia, in the name of the four pillar gods of Hades, we promote you to be the Lord of the Stars. The voices of the four pillar gods echoed in Patricia's ears. Patricia's screams finally stopped. Although she was still weakening, the moon god was still an important part of her existence. At the very least, she wouldn't be completely destroyed. However, Achi's moon was gone. It was likely that she wouldn't be the only one who would suffer. As expected, the internet has been disconnected. Although the moon was still a member of the stars, Patricia had used the moon as the core to create the star web. Now that the core was gone, even if the network was still there, it had lost its function. In this strange world that couldn't be perceived by the naked eye, everything was losing its light. The originally bright silver star web was now withered and dying. But as long as the core and the network were still there, rebuilding was only a matter of time, as long as the moon god would give us time. In everyone's eyes, the moon had already been devoured by the demon god. All that was left were pieces of wreckage floating in midair, neither going up nor down, like leftover biscuit pieces. That planet-sized demon god didn't seem to be full yet. He had already turned his attention to the ground. He was moving at a speed that seemed slow but was actually incredibly fast. Judging from the direction he was moving, he was attempting to descend onto Achi. Following his descent were countless tiny black dots. But if one got close enough, they would discover that even the shortest of these foreign invaders was more than 10 meters tall. I absolutely can't let him descend onto Achi. At this moment, I definitely wasn't the only one who was thinking this. In the upper planes, Mountain Paradise's dimensional door opened wide, and countless angels flew out. Under the leadership of the gods, they faced the demon god who intended to destroy the world. In the Chaos Abyss, an ancient demon lord and a powerful demon opened a dimensional door to the mortal plane. Demons and angels actually became allies. In the Nature faction and the Elemental planes, powerful existences that had been forgotten by everyone else all jumped out one after another. They were fighting for themselves as well as for the world itself. Even if it was a futile attempt to stop a chariot, a mantis that was forced into a corner would still struggle one last time. I shook my head and got up, preparing to take action. The entire Hades faction started moving as well. Ale and the other four pillar gods' illusory figures were almost tangible. But just as everyone was about to despair, countless rays of light appeared. A torrent of light engulfed the invaders in midair, along with them was hope. 350 star-hours ago, we received a dimensional request for assistance from an individual named Roland Ka. We learned that this plane is currently being invaded by other planes. According to the Guardian Oath of Friendship between all intelligent creatures in the universe, we have come to provide assistance. Dimensional doors opened one after another, and our allies of steel walked out from them. Chapter 835. Countless beams of light spewed out from the dimensional gate, and what appeared in a flash were groups of steel warships. There were round, square, cylindrical, small boats, huge airships, and all sorts of gigantic ships. Most of them were metal battleships, but there were also some strange-looking gigantic creatures. Who's calling for an airship fleet? Something's wrong with this scene. I rubbed the corner of my eyes, unable to believe what I was seeing. I could clearly see humanoid black dots within the battleship. Individual transmigration? A magical girl with a magical staff? I think I need some 58-point all-purpose medicine. System, exchange for 2 bottles of sorghum liquor for me first. Also, is there anything you'd like to say? The world is huge. I was rendered speechless. This was doubtlessly useless. Once a sealed dimensional door was opened, who knew what was outside? Of course the world was huge. However, the battle in the sky hadn't ended yet. Thanks to the star-devourer demon god's tremendous size, it was likely that anyone could see this battle. The gigantic planet creature was still unable to directly fight against the torrent of light created by the battleship. From the moment that the gigantic airship fleet appeared, it unhesitatingly turned around and ran. But judging from how well the chaotic Allied airship fleet was able to do so, perhaps this wasn't the first time. What I cared about the most were the stats of some of the airship. Isn't that a Gundam? Although it's obviously a shrunken version. It was destroyed. There's actually someone inside? That's not a gigantic robot, but a spacesuit that looks like a Gundam? Why does that saucer-shaped airship look so familiar? Is it the Enterprise? It seems that I've met someone from the same world. HE had been sealed off for so many years. Occasionally, powerful individuals would find a way to leave by themselves, but I'd never heard of anyone from the outside successfully entering HE. Were there really no outsiders here? Not necessarily. Roland, was a transmigrator with memories from my previous world. And if I remembered correctly, these airships with stats were all from famous sci-fi movies and anime back in the day. Rather than saying that some world just happened to develop from movies and anime, I was more convinced that those nerdy shut-in airship engineers who flew into space used a different method to continue their favorite culture. It was just like playing with plastic figurines until they were 1-to-1, or playing with real Gundams that were several buildings tall. If that was the case, there was only one possibility. It hasn't even been 100 years, and Earth has actually developed to such an extent. Now that I think about it, this seems to be unexpected but reasonable. When I left, I remember that it was the year 201X. At that time, space technology had already landed in the sky and explored the endless universe. Based on the speed of technological advancement back then, given another 400 years and 20 generations of development, it was entirely possible for them to develop into the space battleship Yamato by the year 24XX, provided that everyone didn't get too excited and end up fighting over nuclear wastelands and trash. Judging from the fact that more than half of the fleet was designed in the style of my homeworld and was designed in typical human styles, it was highly likely that my homeworld, Earth, wasn't far away from HE. This is really, my system was rendered speechless. I had considered this possibility before, but even the goddess of order wasn't sure when I would arrive in this world. If I didn't open the dimensional door, I wouldn't even know how far away Earth was from HE. Since they only came here after receiving Roland's request for reinforcements, then I more or less knew what had happened. If there was light, then there would be darkness. If there were bandits, then there would be police. If there were wolves, then there would be sheep. No, I didn't say it was the opposite. In this day and age, sheep were far more powerful than wolves. A wolf-eating sheep had long since become an epic quest. A certain undying super-wolf wouldn't be able to complete it even after several thousand episodes. I was thinking that although Roland's thoughts were quite mechanical, his mechanical logic was completely based on theory and possibility. Since there were so many hungry hunters out there, then perhaps there would be hunters who would manage and fight against these wild beasts. Since this was the most likely way to save the world, then I might as well carry it out. With so many coming, it's possible that Roland self-destructed because he was outnumbered. For gods, the physical body is power, and power is will. A god's shard of light might be the best way to ask for reinforcements in this world. I felt that my guess was correct, but my system rejected it with an abnormally heavy tone. That's impossible. Actually, I already knew how Roland died half a month ago. I didn't tell you because it was rather embarrassing. Embarrassing? He valiantly blocked the dimensional door and faced countless gigantic gods and monsters. He valiantly fought until the very last moment, and even self-destructed to send a distress signal. How could that be embarrassing? Even I had changed my opinion of Roland. No, there shouldn't have been any fighting. You should know that Roland is an order god, a pure god of faith. And the area outside the dimensional door isn't within the service area of the power of faith. I thought about this for a moment before coming to a realization. Roland rushed out, but before he even met any enemies, he discovered that he had no signal? Although there was silence, this was doubtlessly a type of tacit agreement. From a certain standpoint, this was indeed rather foolish. Although Roland was an enemy in the past, I feel that his act of asking for help will leave behind a glorious legacy in history. Perhaps he'll even become a hero who saves the world, becoming the idol of worship for future generations. For the sake of the entire Achi's reputation, let's pretend that we don't know anything at this time. I could already imagine how awkward Roland must have been at the time. The gods of faith were inseparable from faith. Roland himself was the accumulation of countless faith origin forces. When Roland rushed out of Achi, that meant that he had cut off his own source of faith. He was just like a kite with a broken string, unable to return. A Nokia with no signal could only be used to block bullet. When Roland discovered that he was rapidly weakening to the point of death, then he probably discovered that he wouldn't be able to survive no matter what, so he unhesitatingly chose to self-destruct. No wonder he died so quickly. Since Roland died so quickly, we had a rather high opinion of the outside world's average power level. It seemed that we were being a bit too high. Now it seems that this Star Eater is much smaller than the one we met back in the day. It's likely that it's still in its infancy, so it shouldn't be that difficult to deal with. As long as it descends into Achi, it'll have to modify itself according to Achi's rules. According to our calculations back in the day, although its descent will definitely cause severe damage, it'll be weakened by the world's natural laws. You two brothers alone should be enough to deal with it. Us two brothers? 2 main gods would be enough? Alright then, the Star Eater was weaker than expected. In that case, the chaotic airships that needed to band together in order to deal with the Star Eater weren't as strong as expected? Judging from how disorganized the Star Eater was, it indeed seemed like a temporary organization made up of random troop. I silently calculated that as long as technology and magical engineering had a foundational foundation, it would enter a period of rapid development. Judging from how fast Achi's magical engineering technology was progressing, it wouldn't be long before the Star Eater's airships left the atmosphere. Perhaps in less than 300 or 400 years, our airships would also be able to enter outer space, and we would be able to plant the seeds of civilization among the stars, becoming a true interstellar civilization. At this moment, the Star Eater had completely retreated in defeat. However, the Star Eater's airships had no intentions of continuing to chase after it. They stopped in midair, giving the gods and mortals an invisible pressure. Announcement: we have expelled the Silver Star Destroyer, a space pirate with a threat level of 15,623. We have fulfilled our obligation to rescue all intelligent life forms in the Overwatch contract. We first discovered that your civilization has already developed to the point of being able to leave the planet as an individual, which meets the minimum requirements for a B-level world to join the Overwatch contract. According to the 3rd clause of the contract, we, as B-level veterans, invite your civilization to join the Overwatch contract. An agreement to rescue each other? What a familiar routine. A United Nations from the interstellar era? TSK, it would seem that it's the same everywhere. There are wolves, hunters, and societies. The small world has been opened, and the outside world is different. In midair, a gigantic projection was floating with mysterious runes. However, no matter who it was, no matter which species it was, they would be able to understand this ancient and solemn contract without any doubt. Overwatch contract for intelligent lifeforms. 1. You are not alone. You are not the only one. Every encounter between intelligent life forms in the endless universe is a miracle worthy of praise. Please put down the butcher's knife in your hands and heart, and search for the possibility of communication. 12. Watching, protecting, and aiding each other is the duty of every intelligent life form. 17. All power originates from the soul. Soul power, magic, technology, and intelligence are essentially the same. Do not discriminate against other civilizations or individuals at any time. Many clauses of the contract attracted my attention. There was far too much knowledge and rules that I could study in detail, but my vision was already becoming hazy. It would seem that I had suddenly felt that there was nothing to worry about, and had become too relaxed. My obsession had disappeared, and it was time to report to the river Styx. I was rather hesitant, but when I thought about how troublesome it would be to deal with those aliens, I was delighted that I could successfully become someone who did nothing. Does this count as me being willing to die rather than go to work? This is impossible. Mom. It's actually Mom. What? What could make the venerated goddess of order be so scared that she would call me Mom? Could it be that she was the new version of Little May's mom? Cough, cough. It seemed rather amusing to make such a comment before dying. I forced myself to focus and did my best to recognize the contract, but I was almost scared to the point of calling her Mom. At the very bottom of the contract were the signatures of 12 ancient existences. They were probably the first signatories of the Overwatch contract, which was why they had left their own signatures on the original contract. Their names were the concept of their existences. Just looking at them would allow me to sense how immeasurably powerful they were. And the fifth signatory seemed so familiar. H.E. Chapter 836. I'm so unlucky. How could it be like this? Everything ended before I even had a chance to cause a scene? This shouldn't be the case. Roland. It's all your fault. Hurry up, idiot. I still want to find an old friend to hear the latest news. Of course, I wouldn't bother with Cavendish's nagging. We had just reached the shore not long ago. Towering black mountains surrounded us on both sides. The only silver path led to a distant palace. The familiar black-gray sky before us made me sigh in amazement. The Hades. I never expected to arrive here. Cavendish's sigh was filled with memories. Perhaps it was this battle in the Hades that changed the path of the entire world. For Cavendish, he had broken free from the will of the Chaos Abyss's control here. He had obtained Cynthia's knowledge and memories, and obtained complete freedom. That was why he had the thought of opening the door and causing a scene. As for me, the establishment of the Hades also meant that the cycle of despair had been cut off. We had avoided the worst possible ending and an unstoppable misfortune. It could be said that this battle in the river Styx had changed the fate of the entire world. This change would only have greater and greater effects in the future. The collapse of the Holy Light system was supposed to have been a complete destruction. The resulting chaos in politics, nations, countries, and species, as well as the other ambitious species, was more than enough to instantly reduce the ruling human species to second-rate status. Once a king lost his crown, the new nobles who took over the throne wouldn't give him a chance to rise again. But now, the holy light system of the Hades had replaced this broken outer layer. As long as we could survive this period of time, many situations would be different. This meant that the Hades would have a more moderate version of the pure holy light teachings. This would completely replace the original radical version of the holy light teachings. Plus, the Hades faction was a temporary government, made up of many different species to begin with. Racial discrimination would be greatly reduced. Although it was impossible to completely eliminate racial discrimination, it was now time to stop foolishly killing the children of other species as heroes. Really, I should thank those friends in the sky. I knew a little about the viciousness of the human heart. No matter how friendly these visitors from the outside world seemed, no matter how neutral the treaty seemed, No matter how loud the slogan of not interfering with the internal affairs of other species and worlds sounded, as long as those iron battleships were still floating in the sky, there was still a possibility that the star-devouring demon would return. In that case, with such an external enemy existing, the He People's society would become much more peaceful, and the differences between species would be greatly reduced. Intelligent creatures had a bad habit that stemmed from their survival instincts. They always liked to draw a circle. Those outside the circle were their enemies, and those inside the circle were their friends. Then, they could use high-sounding reasons to clean up and expel their enemies, throwing the blame for the mistakes and tragic reality onto their enemies. As a result, they monopolized resources and space for development. The so-called connections, the so-called small groups, the so-called opposing classes, the so-called various struggles, in the final analysis, were nothing more than a thread needed by the human heart. This thread could be religion, race, skin color, ethnicity, or even gender, region, accent, education level, whether tofu pudding was sweet or savory. This seemed to have brought up a taboo topic. In order to not become a battle between the sweet and savory factions, let's stop here. Earth's history was clearly one where species had never stopped fighting. In He, where many species coexisted, wars and conflicts had never stopped. In a non-holy war, race and religion were the most common reasons for war. And when it came to fighting between species of the same species, it would be even easier to come up with many reasons. Since there were benefits to be fought over, any random line drawn would be enough to cause a bloody battle. In a holy war, the order and chaos factions would be a natural line. And now, there was an additional line between the original residents of He and the visitors from the outside world. In that case, it could be expected that things would be much more peaceful within this line. And if I'm not mistaken, that Overwatch agreement isn't just an empty written document. Although it definitely has many flaws and loopholes, the wills of the 12 powerful existences are more than enough to make it more effective than a soul contract. By the way, thank you for opening the door. I'm guessing that the world will become much more peaceful because of this. Should I suggest awarding you a Roland Peace Prize? I smiled in delight as I sincerely expressed my gratitude to Cavendish. Then, I happily watched as my younger brother, who had a bad temper, flew into a rage. The process? For me, who only cared about results, the process wasn't important at all. Only an idiot like Cavendish would be satisfied after causing a huge ruckus. What do you mean success or failure isn't important? Only the process is important? That's probably just a loser's way of consoling himself. Why lose if you can win? No matter how beautiful the process is, if the result is a complete mess, are you trying to put on a show for others to watch? Or are you just an artist who seeks to satisfy himself? I've always been a results-oriented person. My motto is to seek victory at all costs and by all means. And now, it's time for me to enjoy the fruits of my victory and laugh at this idiot who worked so hard for nothing and even lost his life. You're laughing at me? Didn't you lose your own life in the end? According to what you said, you could have just watched me open the door. Why did you have to sacrifice yourself? This time, it was my turn to feel aggrieved, and I almost cried. I had died such an unjust death. I hadn't even had the time to destroy all of my precious books in my old residence. If word of this got out, wouldn't my reputation be completely ruined? However, Cavendish was probably the most regretful and helpless about the current situation. Not only did he lose the chance to go out and have fun, he hadn't even caused a huge ruckus. He was probably quite unwilling to accept this. In the end, the result of both of us hurting each other was that neither of us was happy. We both kept our mouths shut and ignored each other, just like before. The one in front of me looks rather familiar. That pitiful female ghost whose stomach had exploded was actually viciously glaring at me. Keep looking at me, keep looking at me? If you keep looking at me, I'm going to eat you. The river Styx was quite dangerous. Undead souls would constantly lose their memories and sense of self in the river Styx. Simply speaking, it would be a constant -1 in intelligence. In the end, the only things left behind would be their deepest obsessions. And even these obsessions would continuously disappear as the cycle of reincarnation continued. Such chaotic undead souls would also make it easier for the cycle of reincarnation, as well as for the current judgment of the Hades. Logically speaking, we had died quite pitifully this time. Our souls had been soaked in the river Styx for almost an entire month, so the river Styx should have turned us into idiots. But it seemed that our souls had died far too many times and had developed a resistance to the river Styx. The end result was that only the two of us were chatting amongst the confused dead. Ilmigia? Or Leona? You died such a pitiful death. Cavendish's sudden scream startled me. It was truly such a coincidence that I met an old acquaintance. However, that female ghost ignored Cavendish and kept staring at me. Could it be that she was one of them? I took a closer look at her and discovered that I had mistaken her for someone else. Her skin color, face shape, and hair color are completely different. Do you think that I'm an idiot? Ha, did I scare you? You're still feeling guilty, aren't you? Keep feeling guilty, Leona. You died such a pitiful death. We continued to hurt each other as we followed the group. Suddenly, light appeared in front of us. The Tower of Holy Light, which was supposed to guide the dead, was now paying attention to us. The mountain path also became much easier to walk on. Perhaps they had discovered me. Roland, you designed this, didn't you? Do you know what will happen to us next? Are there any loopholes? Even Cavendish was hesitating now. It would seem that he had also been greatly frightened by the divine laws. I smiled in delight. I had been waiting for this day for far too long. Of course, there aren't any loopholes. I personally created this judgment system. It's absolutely, foundationally impossible for there to be any loopholes. Even if the judges want to go easy on us, they won't be able to. For some reason, the more I talked about it, the sadder I felt. Although I was quite proud of my judgment system, it seemed that I had once again broken a new record of shooting myself in the foot. A punishment of more than 200 years in the Inferno. It's also possible that I'll be randomly assigned to the beast path during my reincarnation. Yep, don't look at others. I'm talking about you, Cavendish Miss. Whenever I was in a bad mood, it would be better to share it with someone else. Although I reckoned that even if my punishment was light, it would still be limited. Ilmigia? This time, I wasn't mistaken. That female soul who had a satisfied expression like a saint was being enveloped in a pink glow as she sunk into the ground. It would seem that she was going to serve her sentence in the Inferno of Lust, one of the 7 infernos. In the Inferno of Hades, the amount of light represented the weight of the person's crime. Judging from how she was as bright as a lighthouse, this female soul would be serving at least 100 years. Meow, so scary. Can I cancel my contract with her now? The cat-shaped ghost that had been sleeping on my head all this while yawned. I did some calculations and felt that this cat's sentence would probably be even longer than Cavendish's. TSK, I told you to cancel your contract earlier, but you refused. It's too late now, my dear cellmate. Please take care of me in the future. Actually, most of my and Harlow's crimes were related to murder and deceit. It was quite likely that we would be serving our sentences in the same inferno. Finally, we reached the end of the mountain path. When we arrived at the main hall of the Judgment Hall, even I couldn't help but suck in a cold breath when I saw that familiar figure with emotionless eyes. Sinner Roland, your crimes are to be investigated 50 years later, in a certain level of the Inferno of Hades. Bail? Using meritorious deeds to atone for your crimes? There's no such rule in the laws of the Inferno of Hades that I created. I refuse to accept this. I want to appeal. This is a black-hearted civil servant who can't use public power for private purposes. Stop giving me so much trouble. I'll find an opportunity to let you out. Do you really think it's easy for us? It took so much effort to pass a new law amendment that allows those who have served more than half their sentences to atone for their crimes? Stop making trouble for me. Ale rubbed his forehead. This bastard in front of him really knew how to make trouble for him. Even if he died, there would be so much trouble. Just how many times had those two insane women tried to attack the inferno of Hades to break out of prison? Yet, those two insane women had returned from the outside world, becoming even stronger than before. Just one person was in prison, yet he had to worry about the entire prison being blown up into the sky. This was truly too much of a dilemma. Also, that blockhead Womians had no concept of human emotions at all. In the end, it was only because this matter was too important that they passed such a meaningless amendment to the Inferno of Hades. For the sake of the entire world, the Inferno's prison guards could entrust those who had served more than half their sentences to make up for it. Why was it meaningless? In normal situations, not only would the prison guards have no need to ask the prisoners for help, the souls who had served their sentences to a certain extent would have long since lost their sense of self and reincarnated into the cycle of reincarnation. Besides, we really do have something for you to do, and this is something that only you two are capable of doing. I fell silent. Why would the Inferno of Hades come looking for us? I had long since retired and should be enjoying my old age. Right now, all I needed to do was wait for my sentence to end so that I could return to the cycle of reincarnation. Aichi, we need to find Aichi. You probably don't know this, but Aichi has also joined the Guardian of Intelligent Life contract. Since the god Aichi has received a lot of attention, he's been viewed as the magical civilization with the greatest potential in the past 1,000 years. After all, he's the original civilization of the 12 pillar gods. In order to have more authority in the Guardian of Intelligent Life, and for the future of Aichi's civilization, we need Mother Aichi. And then, Il said a lot. It would seem that he had been under too much pressure recently, causing the originally cold and cool young man to swiftly go through menopause like a naggy uncle. The general gist of what he meant was that the 12 pillar gods had long since vanished from the universe, and the civilizations that had obtained the pillar god's support and inheritance were all mega-civilizations that were capable of traversing the entire universe. The current Aichi was still quite young, but the tallest of trees had already attracted the attention of many. That was why we needed a truly powerful ally. In the end, the gods in the Hades had done their research and decided to definitely send out little tadpoles to find their mothers. I meant send out the children of fate to find Aichi. Why me? Of course. You're carrying Her Highness Astria, aren't you? Don't think that we don't know that she's the Elven Empress, the goddess of creation. Being imprisoned to such an extent is... I'm so envious. Of course, the one who said such a thing wasn't Ale. Instead, it was Cavendish who had an expression of jealousy and envy. Cavendish was probably the most pitiful of all. The Inferno also had additional punishments for playboys. One such punishment included a meeting with his ex-girlfriends. I meant a meeting for revenge. Cavendish's 4-digit lovers were simultaneously transformed into virtual souls by the power of the dimensional laws and revived. That bitter Shuraba was truly delightful. I didn't know what happened to the people involved, but at the very least, I watched it as a comedy. Yep, it was especially so when they were cut into more than 4,000 pieces by knives and forks, and then each person had a piece to eat. It was truly delightful. If I had the chance, I would definitely write a new novel about this to warn those who were already in the game. Justice will always descend from the heavens. Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, in the end, due to the existence of a certain goddess within me, it seemed that I was the most likely existence to find Aichi. Ale and the others used this reason to convince Womians to end my sentence early. I fell silent as I mysteriously hesitated. Actually, I don't want to go out. This wasn't a lie. I really didn't want to go out. At the very least, I obtained the peace that I desired here. If you don't go out, we'll let those two crazy women in here to accompany you. I fell silent as I recalled Cavendish's pitiful state that day. I couldn't help but shiver. Roland, I miss my mother. Astria's words caused me to hesitate. That was because I now owed her a favor. Roland, I want a child, a real child, a healthy, living child. The blonde young girl behind me suddenly hugged me. Her sudden outburst of words scared me so much that I almost spat on Ayla's face. Cough, cough, can a soul be choked to death? Harloise, what nonsense are you saying? However, her calm expression conveyed her determination to me. Without a physical body, she would naturally have no descendant. She was unwilling to accept this. Actually, I was even more unwilling to accept this. It had already been more than 400 years. My pitiful life as a great mage had probably broken Eichi's historical record. I had to erase this part. I definitely couldn't let anyone know about this part. I definitely couldn't be recorded in history with such a title. I had to complete my own life. Alright, I agree. But I don't have a physical body right now. You guys need to prepare for this. I'm confident that I can retain my memories and sense of self after reincarnation. However, my physical body needs to have a sufficiently powerful bloodline. Otherwise, it'll be so tiring to start all over again. Don't worry about this. They've long since prepared for this. I guarantee that you'll be satisfied. They? In the future, what I regretted the most was that I didn't investigate who they were. 1 year later, a certain gynecologist department in a certain hospital on Earth became the focus of many fanatics. The head gynecologist of this hospital hadn't slept for 2 entire days. After all, the child that was about to give birth was the offspring of an alien species, the wood spirits, and the humans of Earth. Let's not mention how many people cursed the lucky man who married a wood spirit, how many people tried to break his third leg, and how many people tried to change the law to send the person who dared to touch a legal young girl to prison. But as an outstanding species of interstellar diplomats, the cute and intelligent wood spirits easily gained the favor of outsiders. After several decades of interaction, they gained countless fans from Earth. And after this mixed-blood child was discovered to be a twin, he received even more blessings and expectations from countless people. And then, the child's father received a hammer and blade that broke all previous records. Although there were precedents of mixed-blood children between Eichi humans and wood spirits, and although scientists repeatedly guaranteed that humans from Earth and Eichi humans were essentially the same genetically, the doctors still didn't dare to let down their guard at all. They took turns to be on duty 24 hours a day, until the child was unexpectedly born ahead of schedule. Where is this place? I woke up from my daze, but my question turned into a loud infant's cry. The familiar yet foreign Chinese from Earth instantly helped me understand where I was. I'm back again. I was in a daze and was now back in my homeland. I sighed emotionally. Eichi's past was like a dream that had shattered behind me. Everything had to start anew, haha. I've had enough of living without the internet or television. Finally, I, Roland, the king of games, have returned. Wait a moment, a young body has the intelligence of an adult? Isn't this the traditional story of reincarnation? Can't I just copy songs, books, and inventions to date school beauties? Could it be that my misfortune has truly ended, and that someone else has written the script of fate? I laughed even louder as I thought about this, and in the eyes of the mother of the young girl, who was lying on the bed, her healthy eldest son was full of energy and had such a pure and cute smile. I could also faintly sense a familiar soul beside me. As expected, that little bastard had followed me here as well. After all, in a way, we were inseparable. Ha, it seems that I've won. I'm still the older brother. Ha, my foolish younger brother, watch how I'm going to take care of you. I could sense that my life force was slightly stronger than his. It seemed that I had been born slightly earlier than him. What an excellent pair of twins. You're truly fortunate. I instantly started trembling. She seemed to be a young nurse. I did my best to raise my head in despair and struggled to look at the inside of my legs. However, not only was I unable to move at all, how could an infant who didn't even have the ability to sense light clearly see the outside world? Handsome older brother, you have to properly protect your younger sister in the future. I gently rubbed my cheek with my lip. This old woman was actually trying to take advantage of me, but I wouldn't argue with her. At this moment, I was instantly satisfied and almost cried tears of joy. Meanwhile, on the other side, I could even sense a certain unlucky fellow's despair. She was struggling and wriggling as she hugged the foot of the bed and did her best to raise her head. Could it be that she intended to ram her head into the baby bed and die? Little sister, are you hungry? Give me the baby. Unfortunately, the mischievous little sister had been discovered, and then given to the little girl mother to feed. At this moment, Cavanwen's despair was truly delightful. I felt heartache. Yep, no matter what, I was still an older brother, so I should treat my younger sister better. At the same time, I heaved a sigh of relief. Outside the window, a pregnant woman was being pushed into the delivery room, and my magical pet contract was activated once again. It would seem that a certain cat had successfully reincarnated into a human. Wait a moment, let's hope that she didn't get the wrong gender. If she did, just imagining the scene would be unbearable. I was straight after all. I kept feeling like something was off. Normally, souls would have their own color, and normal people wouldn't get it wrong even if they reincarnated. Wasn't Cavendish being a bit too unlucky? Have you named them yet? The young nurse hugged me. Her ample breasts seemed rather familiar. Ahem, I was probably rather hungry, but I still needed to have a bottom line. Where was the milk bottle? The older one's name is Roland, and the younger one's name is Cavinci. Not only was I frightened, even Cavinci was so frightened that she forgot to cry. Aren't they going to use their father's surname? I recall that their father's surname is Jiang. Yep, these two children are quite fortunate. They received the blessings of our species' main god. Mother Goddess Amelia even decided to become their godmother. She was the one who came up with their names. The young mother's words were filled with pride. Being able to have the long-retired goddess Amelia become their godmother was the happiest moment of her life. Waf! Waf! As for the two babies, they started crying at the same time. They were so scared. Actually, they weren't crying at all. Rather, they were arguing in baby language. You scammer, Roland! You dragged me down with you! How many times has it been already? How can you blame me for this? This is clearly the world's evil intentions. Alright then, the world had been shot once again. However, the two energetic babies caused the young mother to misunderstand. Little babies, are you happy? There's even more to come. Godmother even said that she'll personally come here to bless you. The two babies instantly stopped crying and simultaneously started struggling in an attempt to escape this dangerous area. Unfortunately, the newborns didn't have enough strength. After struggling for a while, they were still unable to move in the nurse's and young mother's arms. The nurse's braided hair fell on my face. It felt itchy, yet strangely familiar. I instinctively reached out to grab it, but what I touched was smooth silver hair. By the way, you can't stay here with two babies, right? Can someone help you take care of them? My internship is about to end, so I probably won't be able to stay in the hospital. Why don't I be your nanny and help you take care of your children for a while? I've learned nursing before. That was strange. Why did this voice sound so familiar? That's wonderful. Thank you, E. The young mother had been worried that it would be difficult for her to do chores due to her short hands. Now that someone was helping her take care of her children, she was overjoyed. Only now did she remember that she didn't even remember I Ching's name. Eliza, miss. I'm a Russian mixed blood. Please take care of me. At that moment, I felt as if that warm embrace had become the firmest prison. It tightened, it really tightened. At this moment, I didn't know where to run. At this moment, A familiar voice came from outside the door. "Where's my little son? Bring him over so that Godmother can kiss him. Little Roland, you're so cute. Come, call me Mommy." My vision instantly darkened. "Where's the crib? Just let me bang myself to death,"